All right, great. Well, thank you all of you for joining us today for another Workshop Wednesday. Today we have with us the Director for Community Planning and Funding from the Rhode Island Office of Housing and Community Development, Mr. Michael Tondra. So Michael, thank you for being here today and for sharing this important information with our attendees. And as I said, we are recording it as well. So anybody with questions at the end, if you want to hold the questions, I can um, help moderate those if that's the easiest way to go. But I'm sure Michael will also share his contact information if you have more detailed questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, and good morning, everybody. Let me just open up by thanking Ernie, Jordan, and Jennifer for inviting me here today to talk to you all about the state's Community Development Block Grant Program that my office administers. I am going to share your screen and share a presentation to help guide some of my comments. But before I do, just to introduce myself a little bit. I know some of the folks that seem to be in the room today, but I've worked with the state for a few decades at this point, and many people know me from one of the various positions that I've held over the years. Currently, as Jennifer mentioned, I am the Director of Community Planning and Programs within the newly formed Department of Housing, which is headed by Secretary Stephen Pryor and Assistant Secretary Anna Moore, who also serves as the Executive Director of the Housing Resource Commission. So let me share my screen. Hopefully, Heck never works as planned. And I'm hoping, does everybody see that? Oh, good. Okay. Let's just start the show. So as I said, our CDBG program is managed by the Department of Housing, but we administer a number of other programs as well within my section. They include, I'm not going to talk about any of these in detail, but if anybody has any questions or interest in any of them, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to share what's going on with those. But they include the HOPWA program, which is the Housing Opportunity for People with AIDS, which is a HUD competitive grant annually. The Recovery Housing Program, which is a new program that started a few years ago, which is specifically providing housing opportunities to people that are recovering from addiction, in particular from the opioid epidemic. And we are working with our state's behavioral health care department to distribute those resources in the coming years. It's primarily scattered site rental assistance. Next is the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which is a program that came out to address the foreclosure crisis probably a good decade or so ago. Most of those funds are completely obligated and expended at this point. We're really in a closeout mode for those activities, but some of you may have a couple outstanding projects that you're trying to wrap up there. And then lastly, we have a couple disaster recovery allocations that our office has received, first related to the floods of 2010, and then for Hurricane Sandy and associated storms. Those allocations came into the state, gave us quite a bit of money that we've distributed, and many of those projects are still active around the state, but we are winding down that initiative as well. Not on the list here, because it really wasn't a standalone, was our state also received a few community development block grants, supplemental allocations to respond to the pandemic, the COVID crisis. And we have obligated substantially all of those monies to at least buckets, if not to specific projects, many that are located in the communities, but there were slightly different rules with those resources that allowed us to actually undertake activities directly, which meant that we could contract with subrecipients. So not all the money had to pass through the municipalities. So you may have some projects in your communities that are actually have a more direct contract relationship with us than they normally do. So on the regular annual CDBG project, which is what I was primarily here to talk about today, wanted to give you kind of the current layout of the way the funds are distributed. But what I do want to say right up front, and this will probably be something I'll repeat a few times, is we've noticed in recent years that there's been a reduction in what seems to be interest in the program. It may not actually be, that may be a bad way of saying it, because you may have interest in the program, but because of the complexity of the program or because of loss of local capacity, you just haven't been able to access the resources. So one of our objectives in the coming year is to really simplify this program as much as possible and assist the municipalities like yourselves to apply for the funds and run and operate programs. So we are welcoming any changes to any of the program design that I'm talking about. There's a number of things with CDBG that we're unable to change because they're just mandated by the federal program requirements and by HUD. But as much as possible, we will try to simplify it and make it manageable so that it provides the best benefit for you all. CDBG has been around, for those of you that know the program, been around for almost a little bit longer than me, actually. They've been just over 30 years. And in that time, it's great because it's one of the federal programs out there that's most flexible to be used for a variety of purposes. It's not very singly purposed like the home program, which is exclusively housing, or a service program that only funds public or essential services. It can fund either of those in addition to infrastructure improvements, which could include streets, sidewalks, facilities. It can be very broadly used to meet whatever the municipalities feel is their primary community development need. In the Northeast, we all tend to be more housing focused states, but around the country, that's not always true. There are folks that actually have in the Midwest, for example, that they spend almost all of their money on infrastructure, water and sewer projects. Or down south, there are some communities that focus exclusively on economic development. So it is really an option for us to even change those priorities. Obviously, it's currently the priority of housing remains, and as kind of obvious from our placement within the Department of Housing, but we do still fund a variety of other activities to meet your need. Now, consistent with that priority, we did not want the program to hinder progress on an activity, have to wait around for an annual competitive cycle in order to move forward with construction of a project. So several years back, we changed the process for those priority activities like housing rehabilitation, housing development, and economic development to say that applications in those high priority categories can be submitted at any time in the year on a rolling basis to our office, and we will fund them on a first come, first served basis. Another benefit of doing it this way is we don't have to, because it's a first come, first served basis, and we're accepting applications this way, we don't have to have that firewall up in discussion in helping municipalities prepare their applications, because it's not a competitive environment anymore for those categories. So if you have anything in your municipality that you'd like to work on, that you'd like to get to us, but you feel like you're a little bit out of your element, you need some help from staff. Our staff is here actually to help you with that. You don't have to, as has been the past going back decades, you don't have to kind of work it through on your own and then submit it and wait to submit an application to us and hope you did the right thing. You can reach out to us right away, and I encourage you to do that, because the earlier the better. It can be a little tricky because some of those federal requirements like public hearings and including citizen participation and all the other requirements that come with an application still hold true, because those are federal requirements that we can't waive. But we've tried to figure out ways to simplify it, and that's the things that we can do to help you through the process. Economic development is in the list too. We can accept stuff on an economic development on a rolling basis, but this is one category. Anybody who has tried to use CDBG for economic development understands this all too well. It is incredibly complicated to use CDBG to find that sweet spot where a business is otherwise going to fail without the assistance, but also financially viable enough to continue in the long run with the assistance. So you have to find that, and you have to be able to navigate all of the other requirements that are associated to that type of activity, including public benefit standards, which is a jobs per dollar invested type of standard, the underwriting, all of that analysis, which is, even for people that are in that field, difficult to do on a regular basis. So in that category in particular, I would say do not try to do it on your own. As soon as you have something that you'd like to work on in the ED category, please reach out to us right away, right from the ground level. We'd rather sit with you, work through everything, make sure you understand all the requirements and make sure it fits so that you can apply. Now, other than those two categories, we have the annual competition, which is what we're in right now. So it's a little bit tricky for me today. I can't necessarily talk about any of the details from the annual competition that we haven't already shared publicly. So I won't be able to answer specific questions about that because state procurement rules prevent me from discussing a project in a competitive environment. But what we can do is I can kind of outline what the program and the annual competition a little bit with you. And also just to let you know, we have done a workshop recently. Some of you did attend, I know, but we have a portal in which you can actually submit questions to our office, and we will answer all of those questions. And we're required to actually post the question and the answer for all other potential applicants to see. And we do that through our website. So that's going to be, that's the process for answering questions. When you do ask questions, I mentioned this at the workshop, the questions should try to be more generally focused. I know that it's tough to kind of, you're working on a very specific project and a very specific question, but usually that specific question breaks down to a larger policy decision. We don't necessarily want to post information about specific activities. So we want to actually have Q&A relative to larger policy issues that may apply to somebody else who's working on a very similar project outside the state. Now, the annual competition is for activities that are outside of those high priority categories. So public facilities, improvements in essential services. Public facilities improvements could include water and sewer projects. It could include streetscapes or street projects. It could be a neighborhood center, a public or of some sort, or community facility, a service center. Essential services there's probably no end to what you could consider what would be an essential service activity, but anything that is a public service. Now, in our action plan, we say that on an annual basis, we will reserve at least 30% of our annual allocation for this competition. So then we're not, even though we have other priorities, we don't want to be solely focused on those. So we say that we'll retain that. I will say that going into the annual competition, it's rare for us to be even close to that percentage because we don't have a lot of activity on the housing and ED side. So we usually go into the annual competition with at least a few million. The other thing I need to flag is that essential services is always a popular activity, of course, because it's getting the assistance to the people on the streets. You often have very good relationships with all of your nonprofit service providers in your municipality, and you want to be able to put in an application for them. The problem is that we are capped at 15% currently of our annual allocation for public services cumulatively. So overall, we can't spend more than several $100,000 on all public services combined. So that can be a bit of a challenge because that usually tends to be a category that we are really oversubscribed for. So just keep that in mind when you're drafting your request for public services, that you're not asking for something like a $400,000 public service project, because that would pretty much be, nearly all we can provide. We might be able to do one or two of those as opposed to being, so we try to spread that money a little bit thinner. Okay. Sorry, let me just make sure I didn't skip anything. I did. Okay, so the applications for this year's annual competitive cycle is actually July 13th. It gives you a little bit longer number of weeks than what we've offered in prior years, but the reason for that is probably obvious, that if we give you the exact number of times, the deadline was going to fall right around Independence Day weekend. So we didn't want to do that to you all. So we pushed it out just a little bit further. Another reason we did that is the newest thing this year, and don't kill the messenger on this one, is all applications have to come in through the state's new grants management system called eService. This isn't true of our office, but it's true across the entire state. All applications for any kind of assistance from the state are going to go through this new system, which is going to track, be used for not just application, but also for invoicing and reporting and the myriad of things that you do in grant implementation. The scary thing is, of course, that this is the first year out with this. So we're unfortunately one of the early programs in as far as running our application cycle through this system. So we are hoping it all goes smoothly. Many of you have participated in the trainings that have been conducted by our state's Office of Management and Budget. If you haven't already, definitely do that, sign up for that, or have somebody in your municipality sign up for that to get familiar with it, because as the first year in, it's going to be, it will probably be a challenge. There'll probably be things that we're not anticipating. But with this grant system, one thing you have to be careful with is we've not previously accepted paper copies. There's always something that even with paper copies that people run into at the end. They got a flat tire there, there was a storm that prevented them from actually delivering the application by the due date. In this grants management system, we may not be dealing with a flat tire so much, but we're dealing with tech, and tech doesn't always go right. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed this entire presentation that my PowerPoint doesn't crash. But so if something's going to happen, it's going to happen. And unfortunately, the system is going to have a hard line stop at the application due date and time. So if you're even 5 minutes late, the system will not let you submit the proposal, and there will really not be anything that our office can do about that. The only possible thing we would have been able to do is to open up the whole application cycle again. If there are other municipalities around the state would have to deal with that. But so go in early, check with the system in next month, even though OMB, as I said, is doing a series of trainings on this. We are actually going to do, the Department of Housing is going to do a training with screenshots of the actual application for CDBG, and your municipality can certainly sign up for that. It should be coming probably the middle of June. We're trying to place it not too early because people haven't really worked through the details of their application, but also not too late, so that you can kind of get familiar with it and work through any bugs before you're actually submitting the proposal. But you're welcome to come as well, everybody here, as well as anybody on your staff. It'll be done electronically, but there will be an in-person option as well here in our offices. And I should mention our offices are no longer in Department of Administration building. We're right here down in 315 Iron Horse Way, which is the Commerce Corporation building. So I bring that up only because coming to in-person meetings is a little bit more pleasant. You can find parking pretty easily here, as opposed to up at DOA. But overall timeline for the implementation of this program is we plan to, our goal is to announce all the funding by the end of September. You'll be getting your applications in mid-July. We would have we're giving ourselves approximately a month to process all the applications, convene our committees for evaluation, make the funding recommendations, and lead them up, and then start to run them up the leadership for approval. And then we've given ourselves, a few weeks at least at the tail end of that in which to do that final approval process. So the effort is to try to get it, the funds announced to you as early as possible, so that you can do your environmental reviews and you can start project implementation before the winter months, in some cases before the winter months strike, and you can hopefully get some momentum going. Now, one thing I will flag is that we've always within our program had a drawdown, what we call the drawdown threshold, which required that folks spend down a portion of their prior awards in order to be eligible to apply for the current year's awards. And just to let you all know, in case it had been communicated back to you, we relaxed that for the two most recent grant years, because we said that going through the pandemic, everybody was just slowed up and implementation and everything was slowed up. So there is actually no drawdown threshold for 20 or 21 funding. But going back prior to that, which would have been, back in 2019, pre-pandemic, there is a drawdown threshold for that, and for 18 and for 17. You really should be looking at a situation where all your 17 funds that were awarded in 17 and probably in 18 as well are substantially, if not completely, drawn down at this point. One thing that you can do as a municipality is, if you find that you had a lingering activity in 17 that is just stalled and not going anywhere right now, and it's going to prevent you from applying for funds, which you do want to do, what you can do is voluntarily return those monies to the program. We would de-obligate them based on your request. And then you could reapply if the activity is still slated to continue in a year or 2 years, whenever it is planning to move forward. You could reapply to essentially restore the money that you had returned. So the project wouldn't necessarily be completely dead. It just, by doing that process of voluntarily de-obligating, you can kind of reset the clock a bit on the activity. And then when we get the money back in, we will include it in the pool of funds that we distribute out, and we'll actually specifically allocate it to something that's likely to spend the money down very quickly, because we have to keep track of what's happening at the federal level, because there are deadlines on our federal funds, and at a certain point they just get wiped at the federal level if we haven't drawn it down. So we have to make sure we're spending down at that. So as far as how much money we had this year, our allocation, as you can see, was $5,427,145, which is essentially level. It's just a slight bit of a bump up from what we got in the prior year. After you minus out the state admin from that, it gave us just over $5.1 million in which we could obligate to subrecipients to undertake activities. We have been accepting applications for the housing projects and ED projects, as we always have, and we continue to. We have actually made an estimation that we will have about $1.6 million in housing projects that we will be funding before the annual competition applications come in. And based upon that, we're estimating that between $3 and $3.5 million will be available to our non-entitled cities through this application. And I should have mentioned that very early on. This is the state program. Our state program funds the funds activities in the 33 non-entitlement municipalities that don't receive an allocation directly from HUD. So the big 6 cities, Providence, Pawtucket, Warwick, Woonsocket, East Providence, and Cranston, all receive a direct CDBG application. So we can't fund those municipalities directly. But one thing I will note is, because of our relative geography in Rhode Island, there is often times where there may be a public facility or a service activity that's actually sited in a municipal community, but serves the residents of both the entitlement as well as non-entitlement communities. In those instances, we can support that service or that facility. The application simply has to come in through the municipality that has the non-entitlement municipality that has residents that are being served. And there are some other rules associated with that, where they want to make sure that the entitlement city basically has skin in the game and is supportive of the project as well. But just want to flag that for you. It doesn't happen all too often with facilities, but is kind of a regular occurrence with public services, because most public services site their offices in the central cities, and the central cities in our case are sometimes 10 minutes out from a non-entitlement community, if not less. So another thing that I want to mention is the changes on the staff side within the Department of Housing. My specific position changed within the office, and that I was formerly the chief of the Housing Resource of the Office of Housing and Community Development and director of the Housing Resources Commission. But that has actually changed, and I am now the director of community planning and programs, which covers this CDBG element. But there's a whole slew of staff within the Department of Housing that are, excuse me, I'm sorry, 1 second. Sorry. So there's a whole slew of staff that are working on other housing programs. There's a whole homelessness unit. There's a unit for the Housing Resources Commission, and a whole number of Department of Housing staff that you may come in contact with. They're all our colleagues and work hand in hand with all of them, but not specifically with the CDBG program. So on the CDBG side, we've even seen some changes in growth within our department, within our office. Folks probably remember that it was this was years ago, it was just a 1-man or 2-man show within CDBG. There wasn't a whole lot of staff, and we've added quite a few additional people in recent years. But what we do acknowledge is that that's become kind of confusing for some of you all, and that you haven't known specifically who you can reach out to when you have a question or a specific issue. So one thing I want to kind of talk to you all about is who else is on the staff now and who you can call if you have questions. Raquel Kennedy is a contractor who is brought in to work with our office specifically related to the COVID resources. So she is, if anybody has a COVID project, because we did run some of them through municipalities, or if you're working with a subrecipient who has this COVID project as well, those folks will be reaching out to Raquel as their primary point of contact. For the regular CDBG program, though, what we've done is kind of operated a little bit like HUD has in the past, in that we're regionalizing the staff so that specifically who you can reach out to. It doesn't mean that's going to be the only person that's going to be involved in answering your question, but what I was hearing back from municipalities is they weren't sure. Do they reach out to Raquel? Do they reach out to Charles? Do they reach out to me? So what will happen now is if you are a metro area, if you're a community within the metro area or Kent County area, your primary point of contact will be Charles Kimes, who's also been with the program for 30 plus years, similar to me. If you are a Quinnic Island, you will be your primary staff person will be Raquel Kennedy, who I just mentioned. South County will be Kimberly Crabble, and Northern Rhode Island will be Christina Costa. Those will be your primary staff people. If you haven't already gotten a letter from them, you will shortly. That will actually just introduce themselves to you, give you their contact information, and just let you know that if you have any questions or you need any technical assistance, you can reach out to them, and then they can shepherd it through the office to make sure that somebody gets an answer back to you in a timely way. But they're not there to just be, they will also be doing monitoring and oversight for the project, but they're not solely that. We want to create an environment that's really more than able to provide technical assistance to you and be able to help you whenever you need assistance. Now, in addition to having those regional points of contact for you all, we have some functional areas that are you have to have some specialization in to really know how to deal with it. So we've also assigned staff to certain specialized areas. That way your point of contact can still be that municipal lead that from the regional discussion in the prior slide, but they will probably circle in one of the staff as indicated on this slide from that has the expertise in that specific issue. So for example, if somebody has a question about labor standards, you may raise that question to Christina if you're in Northern Rhode Island, but Christina will circle Kim in to actually make sure, because she is our person who understands the federal labor standards provisions, including Davis-Bacon and Section 3 and some other requirements. And then they will work together to get you an answer, and Christina will respond back. But we're putting this up here just to let you know who the subject matter experts are who are going to be involved in those discussions. So as I mentioned, labor standards for Kim, but Kim is also someone who's going to receive some extensive training on environmental reviews. We had to do that through COVID because we had a lot of activities with nonprofits, and nonprofits can't serve as a responsible entity in the environmental review process. So we had to do the environmental review for them. So we had to have somebody on our staff that could actually be on the ground and doing what you all have been doing for years. So we now have somebody that can help you through that process. She's received extensive training with that. Charlie will handle fair housing issues, which will be potentially even more important in the coming months, as we understand HUD is looking to push out a new fair housing rule of some sort that we might see some new requirements and standards related to that. He is also the person that processes your release of funds when you submit an environmental review for us. That process is more of an administrative process. As those of you that are aware of it, you submit a request for release of funds to our office. We have to wait a mandatory 15 days or so before we respond. But as soon as that time period is up, we send you back what we call a release of funds, which is the date at which you can begin to obligate and expend the money. So Charlie handles that timeline on that process. Raquel is the COVID contact, as I mentioned. Donna Phillips is our fiscal lead. So we actually have somebody specifically designated to CDBG to make sure payments don't get lost. If you have anything there, she can track it down. She's excellent. And then general inquiries would go through Raquel or even to myself, because I would be the lead when there is actually a decision that needs to be brought in that relates to the policy of the program. It is not just kind of a regulatory quick answer for you. So a lot of folks have been reaching out to us on residential rehabilitation. It used to eat up a substantial portion of our state's allocation. And in recent years, the interest in it, again, bad word to use. I don't know if it's necessarily interest in it, but we haven't gotten a lot of requests in the rehabilitation category. What communities have told us is because they have just don't have enough activity on an annual basis to support the staff, to get the admin to support the staff to run this program. So, and because some nonprofits that used to do it on a regional basis went out of business, they kind of lost the ability to really apply for these resources, and we're looking for the state to kind of step in and assist in some way. So I just wanted to let you know that we've heard that, and one thing that is rolling out right now is SFRF funding, which is our recovery, some of our recovery funding for COVID. A portion of that is being used to establish a home repair program. There will be a vendor selected, and that program it will be rolled out to all qualified census tracts within the state, as mandated by the federal regulations associated with SFRF. The reason this ties back to CDBG is because what we hope to do is, once we have this vendor on board, the program design that we've developed could be replicated in all of the other communities throughout the state. We will actually have potentially a vendor that can serve as a centralized rehab administrator for any small city that is interested in participating in this program, but does not have the capacity local or interest locally to do it. So there's going to be somebody brought in to do that. I think the RFP for that, we're waiting for the final approval, which is supposed to come next week, and the RFP will drop shortly after. So I would hope within the next quarter, we should have an idea of who the vendor might be on that, and then we can start rolling out, talking to that vendor about rolling this out to the non-entitled areas. The only thing I have to asterisk here is that state programs, so we can only fund rehab and non-entitled municipalities, as I mentioned. However, it's interesting that the qualified census tracts, it's almost the exact opposite. So it's, of course, all of the very low income census tracts within our state. So the program that's running out with this SFRF funding is almost mutually exclusive from the areas that are eligible for CDBG, state CDBG. So combining the two will in some ways give us the ability to have statewide coverage. The only other thing I'll flag for this is that historically, we've allowed every municipality to design their own rehab program. we'll still allow that for communities that are planning to administer it directly, but we're going to have one common design for the state entity to actually roll it out. We're not going to, it would be a little bit too unmanageable to have them, trying to navigate 30 something odd different program designs with all slightly unique requirements. So there will be some commonality to the folks that do go through this centralized vendor. I also wanted to flag for you all stuff that's happening nationally, just so that it's on your radar. We're a member of an organization called the Council of State Community Development Agencies, and they're advocating for some changes to the CDBG program, which we're very supportive of and hope occur. If they do happen, three of the main changes that you would be of interest to you would be it's ironic, but the CDBG program technically has very few activities that are ineligible. And it's ironic that one of them is new housing construction, since this is a housing and urban development program. But they are trying to essentially revise the regulations associated with that to make it a little bit more easy for states to actually fund new construction if we want to. For those of you that have done it with CDBG, it is possible. We can do it. There are workarounds for that prohibition, and that's one of the reasons why with housing we accept applications on a rolling basis, because if you need a workaround, you want to do new housing construction, you can talk to us. We can handhold you on what you can support, what you can't support, can and can't support. Another change that they're doing is they're trying to bump up that service cap just a little bit. That was really, they waived it a bit for the COVID allocation funding, and allowed us to spend a lot on that because, of course, the response to this type of the pandemic was very service related responses. It wasn't a natural disaster that required facility investments, infrastructure investments substantially. So they're trying to bump it up a little bit to 20% to give us the ability to fund a little bit more in public services, as we are still, even though we're hopefully on the other side of this, that we are still able to address all of the needs of households that have fallen into crisis over the past couple of years. And then lastly, giving us a little bit more time, a little bit more resources to provide technical assistance to municipalities through the program. So we'd have a little bit more admin to really assist with you all and give you a little bit more capacity locally. One of the other changes, and again, this is like a don't kill the messenger situation, is on the horizon, is something you may have heard from any of your federal agencies you work with. It's called BABA. It's Buy America, Build America provision. Those of you that have been around for a while, remember a Buy American provision from years ago associated that was imposed upon some special allocations we got. And this doesn't seem like it'll be dissimilar from that. But essentially it's across all of the federal programs. All of the federal programs, however, are rolling out the requirements in a different timeline in different ways. Currently with HUD, on this year's allocations going forward, at least for the next year, we really only have to be concerned with major projects that involve major iron and steel purchases, which in our case, because of the nature of the activities we fund, is unlikely to be triggered substantially. However, down the road, we do anticipate this they start to roll, they're incrementally rolling this out, and we'll start to get more requirements revolving around things like buying components that are, built in America or American made or sourced. And HUD is currently working on regulations that will describe how we will implement this and what waivers might be available in some situations. We'll certainly roll all of that out to you all once we have it. We don't have it yet. So just wanted to flag it for you to know that it is something that's on the horizon that we're not looking forward to, but we know is coming. Another thing that's happening is you'd have to live in a cave if you hadn't heard what could happen at the federal level with the government shutdown, potential government shutdown and the debt ceiling. In the past, we have had some other government shutdowns that have occurred because of whatever was going on at the budget nationally. Those usually were short-lived, but our initial response to this is similar. In that we are asking any communities that have outstanding payments that you may have been sitting on requesting are invoicing from the state on CDBG, that you get them into us as soon as possible. Really, we'd like to see them as soon as tomorrow, as soon as Thursday, because we need to process that on the state side and then draw down the federal funds before, in preparation for what could be worst case scenario, where if the government shuts down and these financial systems become inoperational, then we may lose the ability to draw down federal funds and make payments to you all. And I know there are some communities that do this very rapidly, get us payments as soon as they have an invoice, but then there are others that are less cash flow strapped and actually hold on to, they may pay out the invoices and just hold on requesting reimbursement from us until some point later in the month. But so what I was just wanted to make sure I flagged for you all is to get those payment requests into us now, just in preparation for worst case scenario. In the past, the systems have continued to operate for a period of time. But there's always an unpredictable thing that could happen where the system shuts down because it needs a HUD approval on something that is submitted. And if there is a no HUD staff working at that time, obviously we are at a standstill. And because all of our payments go through a single system, and that's not just for CDBG, it's a single system that's used for all the HUD CPD programs, that we could potentially get shut down and not be able to make disperse payments to you all. We're also as an office making preparations for what could happen here, because unlike prior shutdowns, there could be some, as we understand, some assistance programs that might cease to make payments, and we may have more families falling into crisis. So we are trying to make sure that we prepare as much as we can for that, should it occur. Hopefully not. So I promised I wouldn't take the whole hour. I didn't. I've left a few 50 minutes or so, I think, for questions, and happy to take any questions from you all. But if something were to come up about the program, you can feel free to reach out to me on, this is my email for the new Office of Housing. Just a little flag for you all here. All of our domain names have changed recently. It used to be at doa.ri.gov, and now they're all at housing.ri.gov, but this goes directly to me. And then here is probably something I should not do, but it's my cell number. So feel free to call me on my personal cell if anything comes up and you have a question, even outside of working hours. I'm happy to try to talk things through with folks. And we're here to, as I said early on, we're here to try to help you to really drive up interest in the program and make sure that it's really operating effectively in our state. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jennifer. I'm happy to answer any questions folks might have. And thank you all for your attention. And sorry, I hope I didn't drone on. I know I'm getting a little sick of hearing my voice too after 45 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. I will just invite questions here. I see we have one in the chat. So if anyone has questions, feel free to either enter those in the chat, or on the bottom of your screen, the reactions button will allow you to do a virtual hand raise, and I can call on you to ask, just taking yourself off mute. So Christopher Warfel has a question. Is one statewide vendor to implement residential rehab, or is community specific? I think that might be, is there one statewide vendor to implement residential rehab?
Myself off mute there. That's a good question. For the SFRF funded initiative, the one that we're running out, that we're rolling out over the next few weeks, that is one vendor because it is limited to qualified census tracts, which are scattered throughout the state. So there really isn't enough of a concentration to fund different municipalities. CDBG program, however, is different. We can do it either way. There's actually three options that can occur. Historically, we've generally funded regional rehabilitation managers. So there was one for South County, one for Quinnipiac Island and such. There were some communities that were also had enough activity that they were operating their programs themselves individually, just for their sole community. We can fund CDBG either of those two ways, but that vendor that I just talked about that would be brought in, that will be a centralized vendor, will be able to take it on for any community that doesn't have the ability to do either of those prior ways, like individually or through a regional entity. But they still want to participate and make this resource available to their residents. So they could actually use this statewide vendor who will help them. So I know that's a complicated complicated answer to an easy question, but I hope that was clear.
All right, any other questions, folks? And I'm not sure if anybody's just on the phone, but if you want to just take yourself off of mute, you can do that as well. Okay, I guess that means you were very thorough, Michael.
So people are just falling, or else I just put the entire room to sleep, which is probably more likely the reality. But thank you all again for taking times, and thank you to the league for inviting me to come in and talk to you all.
Oh, we do have one question. Sorry, one more. What is a workaround for new housing?
There are several. The new housing construction in and of itself is ineligible under CDBG, but what you can do is there are in support of activities for new housing construction, which are flat out eligible. That would include things like acquisition of the site or the property, site work and development work on the property. All of those are eligible. In addition, one of the biggest ones, which is a little bit more in the weeds to get into today, but I'll flag it anyway, is there is a provision within our regulation which says that if we fund an entity which is meeting the development needs of non-entitled jurisdictions, that they can undertake activities which would otherwise be deemed ineligible under CDBG. So what that means is, the quote unquote, the expression I just used, development entity, an entity serving the development needs of non-entitled jurisdictions. Almost any CVDO or nonprofit developer in your community would probably pass that test. Will have to document that they meet that definition. As soon as they meet the definition, you can apply for any activity for that entity, even ineligible activities, and they could actually do that. It's most commonly used with new housing construction. So you could come in onto that. It's a little, but because it's a little bit nuanced, in that instance, if that's the path you wanted to take, we just say, reach out to us. It's non-competitive environment. We can actually tell you exactly what kind of documentation you have to have in hand to make it work for you.
Great. Wonderful. Okay. If that is our last question, I will close it out for today, but thank you again to Michael. And if you folks would like to share this information on with your colleagues, I am, as I said, recording the session, and I'll be posting it to our YouTube channel probably this afternoon or tomorrow morning. So you can always reach out to me if you need to get further information as well, or be connected to Michael again. And I hope you have a great day and a nice long weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice long weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.